In this session, I'll be discussing the dynamics of empathy as practiced within nonviolent communication. As an image to help you understand what I mean by empathy, I'd like to refer to an image. The image goes this way. I relate empathy to surfboard riding, and I say, imagine yourself getting up on a surfboard. This requires getting in touch with a certain energy. If you don't get on exactly, you can get knocked off. To me, empathy is somewhat like that. Empathy is getting in touch with a life energy that's coming through another person. The life energy that's coming through people at each moment, I have learned, can best be described in words by referring to what that person is feeling and needing. So the empathic connection that I am interested in sustaining is one in which I can stay connected to the life energy coming through another person. And that's what makes it like surfboard riding. It's a challenge because many people, they don't know how to directly express what's alive in them. So they use a rather choppy language. They often tell you what's alive in them with reference to what's wrong with you. When people need empathy the most, they're often expressing it in a pretty violent way. So in that sense, it's very much like surfboard riding, how to get in touch with this energy and flow with it. But the energy coming through people is, for me, a very beautiful, divine energy. So when I can really stay connected with it, I feel like I am riding in a very precious flow of energy. So when we empathize, we focus on what's alive in people. And I'm suggesting that when we see what's alive in people, we see a beautiful energy. What happens when I do empathize? How no matter what the person is saying, it allows me to see the beauty in them. So let me outline some of the components of empathy, things that we need to learn to do to stay connected to people so we can really connect with that flow of energy that's coming through them. The most important part of empathy is the hardest. It involves our presence, our full presence to what is alive in this person at this moment. Presence is the most powerful gift one person can give to another, a powerful gift and a precious gift. For when we give this gift to others, this gift of our presence, it is a major component of healing. It is a major component of the connection that's necessary for people to enjoy contributing to each other's well-being. But it's not an easy thing to do, to give this presence to others, because it requires bringing nothing from the past into the present. It requires seeing the present moment as a newborn infant that's never been before, will never be again. So if we start to think about what the person is saying, we lose this presence. And so all of the theories that we might bring into the present moment about this person, because we might know them, that will get in the way of our staying empathically connected. Or if you have studied psychology as I did for many years at the university and were trained how to analyze people, what leads them to behave as they do, that kind of intellectual training and analysis of what goes on historically that creates present problems, that can get in the way of empathy. One of the things that we need to stay clear about then is not to get mixed up intellectual understanding with empathy. Intellectual understanding is the kind that I'm saying that I received at the university for intellectually understanding what are the kind of things historically that can contribute to people developing certain tensions, problems. And even if this is an accurate assumption that these kind of things are going on in the person, it means that I'm not connecting with this person as a unique person in this moment. I'm bringing in theories and ideas about them. So I am mixing up intellectual understanding with empathy. Another frequent misunderstanding of empathy is to confuse it with sympathy. For example, if a person starts to talk about some pain they're having in their life, the other person might say, "Oh, I'm so sad that you're going through this suffering." Well, that sadness and caring on the part of this person, that could probably be well received if the person in pain first received empathy. But when we are giving a sympathetic response, we're talking about ourselves. This takes the focus away from what is alive in the other person. An image that I use to help keep empathy and sympathy separate is to think of a time when I've had a headache or a toothache and I have gotten involved in a really good book. So what happens? We don't feel the pain. We don't feel the pain because our full attention is in the book. So that full attention is what I'm calling empathy. And it's not to be confused then with after the empathy, we're certainly many times going to have a very sympathetic response. And I have found that people can enjoy that sympathetic response too, once they have had the empathic connection that they need. But to confuse these two things can be very painful. So we don't want to mix up empathy and sympathy. Another thing we don't want to mix up is giving advice with empathy. Very often we think that we are showing understanding of people when we jump right in and start to give them advice. Another thing that's not empathy are the words, I understand. I understand exactly how you feel. Too many people have had people say, I understand, and what the person was understanding was not at all what was alive in the speaker. It was just what their intellectual understanding of the situation was. So in nonviolent communication, as we'll see, we never say I understand. We do something far more powerful. We demonstrate understanding. So let's get to that. How do we demonstrate this special quality of understanding that I'm calling empathic connection? Well, I've already mentioned the main component. It's presence. Just our being fully present to what's alive in the person in front of us. Now, empathy takes place in the now. So if the other person is telling me about some things that happened in their life in the past that has caused great pain in, I put my focus on what is alive in them now when they're telling me. If I get lost in the story of how this all began, I may intellectually understand what's going on in the person now, but I have found that that's far less powerful than if I connect with what is alive in the person now. So this presence in the now is on feelings and needs. That's the best way that I've learned to connect with what's alive in a person at a given moment, to connect with what they're feeling and needing at this moment. Now, that's often quite a challenge to be able to hear, because many people are not talking about what they are feeling and needing at this moment. They think they'll get the empathy they need by telling the story, so they're using a lot of words that go into the past and tell the story, not realizing that that story takes people out of the present and often requires a lot of words that make it even harder to form empathic connection. So we don't focus on what happened in the past, but what's alive in the person now as a result of what happened in the past. We may make reference to the past by saying something like, so when your father used to beat you, it was pretty scary, but now the focus goes into the present. And by hearing you express that you're still feeling rage at your father for doing that. So they may have felt scared in the past when the father did it. But at this moment, as they're recalling it, they may be feeling rage. So that's where the empathic connection comes in the present feeling, not what happened in the past. So empathy involves presence, focus on the now, focus on feelings and needs. That means not on thoughts. Most people are used to talking about their thoughts, what they think about something. But in nonviolent communication, we find that we can form a much more precious connection with people by hearing what is alive in them when they tell us their thoughts. And this requires being aware that many of the thoughts that people make, especially those that judge others or themselves, are really tragic expressions of what they are feeling and needing at that moment. All of these criticisms and judgments are tragic expressions of the needs of the speaker. So when we are making empathic connections, if somebody tells us what they think about us, we don't hear that. We try never to hear what a person thinks about us. I really believe that if we learn how to hear the life behind these thoughts, we'll enjoy people more and live longer. So we go to the feelings and needs that are being distorted by the thoughts that criticize oneself or others. Now, to do that is going to require some guessing, some sensing of what the feelings and needs might be. because the speaker is not directly saying them. And this means that we're going to be wrong some of the time. We're going to sense that a person might be feeling angry and they might be feeling hurt. It's going to be difficult sometimes to really know what a person is feeling. And that's why in empathy, we need to check it out. We need to put into words what we sense the person might be feeling, and then we connect their feeling to what they might be needing. This means that we don't get addicted to being right. We want to connect. It's not a test that we have to get right. So no matter what thoughts or other forms of communication come at us, when we empathize in a nonviolent communication way, we try to connect with what's alive in the person in terms of their feelings and needs. And when we're not sure, we sometimes want to confirm whether or not we have connected empathically with the person by saying the words out loud. And that might sound like, "Are you feeling?" And we then add to that what we sense the person might be feeling. And then we connect their feelings to their needs. Are you feeling as you do because your need for X isn't being met? So that's the rhythm of empathy, to try to connect with these feelings and needs, and putting into words what feelings and needs we're sensing are alive in the person. When we do confirm verbally what the other person is feeling and needing, we do it under two conditions. The first, when we're not sure we have really connected to the person's feelings and needs, then we might put it into words. Say, "Are you feeling?" and sense their feeling because you are needing. Then if we have guessed wrong, the person can correct us. The second reason why we might want to put it into words is not so much for ourselves as for the other person. If we sense the other person would enjoy confirmation that they have been fully understood, we may feel that we have fully understood them, but not need to verify it or confirm it for ourselves. But seeing how vulnerable they are, we might sense that they would feel less tense, less anxious, if they knew that we were just with them, just connecting with what's alive in them. We sense their vulnerability, then reflect back what feelings and needs we heard in their message. And of course, sometimes we're going to guess wrong. We're going to guess they don't need it when they would appreciate it, and sometimes we're going to give it when they don't want it. But in nonviolent communication, we never try to be perfect. We try to be progressively less stupid. We're conscious that anything that's worth doing is worth doing poorly. Now, I've said a couple of things that empathy isn't as I define empathy. First, it's not sympathy. When we give sympathy, we're talking about ourselves. When we're empathically connected with other people, we're focusing on what's alive in them. I've also said that empathy is not saying I understand. It's demonstrating understanding through our non-verbal communication or through verbally reflecting our understanding. Empathy is not giving advice, and empathy is not correcting. So if somebody says something, they're upset about something, and they say, "You had no right to do what I'm upset about." And what if we didn't do what they said? It's very tempting to want to jump in and correct the person and give them the facts. But when people are upset, even if their being upset is stimulated by a misinterpretation on their part, it really helps if we can empathically connect before correction. Now, we may want to correct things that we think would help situations by correcting them, but I suggest that learn how to empathically connect before correcting. People then can trust that what you are really valuing is what's alive in them. And when people trust that you value connecting with what's alive in them before it's important to you to correct situations, that has a big impact on relationships. That empathic connection is valued more than correction. Now, this doesn't mean that after the empathic connection we might not want to get the correction, but empathic connection before correction. Keeping intellectual understanding separate from empathic connection, I find is particularly difficult with people who were trained as I was in psychotherapy of a psychoanalytic nature. I was trained to try to help people connect the present problems they're having with things that happened earlier in their life, to get them insights into this, And the people usually found this very interesting and helpful in a certain way. But it took me quite a few years to realize how much more powerful it was for me to empathically connect with them, rather than to intellectually analyze how their problems began. So let's look at some of the most challenging responses that are hard to empathize with. Of course, one of them is when people are diagnosing us, telling us what's wrong with us. When they start with, the problem with you is that you're too sensitive, or whatever. Now, of course, then if we are going to empathically connect, we don't hear what they think about us. We go to what they might be feeling and needing behind it. When people trust that you value what's alive in them, what they're feeling and needing at a given moment, that takes more precedence for you than whether what they're saying is right or wrong. This has a big impact on the relationship. It makes compassionate connecting much easier, and people really feel that what's alive in them is what matters to you. Now, it often is not going to happen immediately that this shift occurs. What often happens when we empathically connect with a message that comes at us, it gets the person in touch with even more pain that they're experiencing. And when we stay connected to that, they go even deeper. Very often, people need us to stay with them for a while, because if we stay with their present feelings and needs, that gets them in touch with other deeper feelings and needs that are also going on within them. And sometimes this can take quite a while before the person really feels fully understood. So a very important part of empathically connecting is to make sure we stay with the empathic connection until the other person feels fully understood. Now, how will we know that? Well, one thing gives us a clue that perhaps at this moment this person has fully received all the understanding they need. Empathy feels real good. And so when a person receives empathy from another, not only does the person who receives it feel good, but it's highly likely that anyone observing this feels good. There's just something very special when somebody in pain receives an empathic connection from someone. So this reduction in tension may be one sign that the person has had the understanding that they need at this moment. Another clue is that the person doesn't have a rush to continue speaking. Maybe until this point, every time we reflected back what they might be feeling and needing, they said yes and, or no and corrected us. And now they're not responding with this speed. That's another sign that the person might be ready for us to tell how we feel in response to what they've said. But there can be times when those two signs, that is, the person feeling relieved, there being less intensity and speed of responding, sometimes a person can be silent because they're getting up the courage to go even deeper into something that's very hard to say. So I suggest that we be very slow when somebody is in pain to shift away from their pain to our response. So what I'm inclined to do if I'm not sure is to just ask the person, is there more you would like me to hear before I react to what you're saying? Now, I said that one of the challenging messages to hear in an empathic way is when somebody is telling us what's wrong with us. Another message that I have found very important to hear empathically is the message no, or I don't want to, or I'm not willing. How to hear the human behind the no, to be conscious that if we hear a no, we're hearing very little about what's really alive in this person at this moment. And we need to do the same thing with the no as we do if somebody is telling us what's wrong with us. To hear through the message to what is alive in the person when they say that. More specifically, what are they feeling and needing? We show people that a no is a poor expression of what a person is needing. I suggest to hear what is the person feeling and needing when they say that. We'll learn a lot about what's going on by doing that. And again, we'll show the person that we are more interested in the connection with them than in their immediately responding to our requests. And that, as I say, is a very powerful message when people trust that the connection is valued over their submission to whatever we are requesting. Another important message to hear in an empathic way is silence. You see, if we're using nonviolent communication and we learn how to empathically connect with what is going on in other people at any given moment, the other person cannot not communicate with us, because even silence is a very loud, powerful message. That silence is a very loud message if we can connect with what is this person feeling and needing that leads them to choose silence to any verbalization. Another message that's hard to hear is a message that starts with the words, I think, that's followed by a lot of words. And people just keep talking about what they think, or they tell us what has happened, but they don't really know how to say what is alive in them at this moment. And when people do that, it's hard to really feel alive in the conversation if we just hear their words. How to empathize with people who are using more words than we like to follow, and is probably not good for them to use these words for themselves, because they can even sense that when they use so many words, people don't enjoy listening to them. And no matter how many words they use, they're very often not getting the understanding, the empathy that they would like. How to interrupt when we sense that the person needs empathy, but they don't know how to just say they need empathy and say in a few words what has happened that stimulates their present pain, and then tell us what their present pain is. Many people don't realize telling the story doesn't give you the empathic connection that we're needing, as much as referring briefly to what happened and putting the focus of our attention on what's alive in us now. When somebody we sense really needs empathic connection, we can see they're in pain, but they don't know how to stay in the now and just say what's alive now that they want us to hear. And they start just telling us all kinds of things about what happened in the past and what they think about that. And when we're finding it hard to follow because of so many words they're using, and the words are not focused on what they're feeling and needing in the present, we suggest that this is a good time to interrupt. But not to interrupt to take the flow away from the person, but to interrupt for the purpose of bringing them back to life, back to what is alive in them at the moment. And we suggest doing this by saying, excuse me. So to interrupt them when you have heard more words than you want to hear, and when the words are not really connecting you clearly to what is alive in a person. So we say, excuse me, and then what we say is to bring the conversation back to life, back to what is alive in this person at this moment, behind all the words. I would interrupt to try to connect to what's alive in them now behind all these words. I might say, excuse me for interrupting, but I really want to be sure I'm connecting to what you want me to hear by telling me this. When we are finding it hard to listen to so many words, very often the person who's using those words senses that their words are not connecting them, and they get nervous and they use all the more words. So again, I want to maintain that the interruption that I'm suggesting is not one to take the conversation away from the person, but to bring the person back to life, to what's alive in them at this moment, behind all the words. This exercise that I have given people over the years seems to help a lot. It's an exercise I once did when I was first learning empathic connection and wanting to improve my ability to hear what's alive in people, no matter how they communicate to me. I made a list of messages that people might say to me that made me afraid to reveal myself. In other words, I said, what messages have I been afraid to express in my life? And why am I afraid to express these things? And I realized how much I was telling myself that, well, if I am honest about this, the other person might say to me, the problem with you is that you're too sensitive, or something like that. I could see that I was telling myself that my safety depended on how other people might respond to me. And I was keeping a lot of myself hidden because I was telling myself that I had to be afraid of what people might say to me. But then I started to realize I don't have to worry about what people say to me. I only have to worry about how I respond to that. And I saw that if I can respond empathically to a message, I can hear the truth, what that person is really feeling and needing. I don't have to be afraid to reveal myself. So what I did was this exercise. I listed some of the things that I was most afraid that people might say to me if I was honest, and then I practiced empathizing with those messages. And here's how I did that. For each message on my list, I could see that I was afraid to reveal things about myself for fear of getting that message back. For every one of them, I thought, what might the stimulus be for the person to say that to me? That is, what might I have said or done that might stimulate this message that I was so afraid of getting back? And for each item on the list, then, that I saw that I had been hiding parts of myself out of fear of somebody might saying this back to me, for every one of the messages, I practiced sensing, guessing what that person might be feeling and needing if they said that to me. So if they said something to me and then I didn't like it and they said back to me, "The problem with you is that you're too sensitive." Well, I tried to guess, well, if they said that to me, what would they be feeling or needing at that time? And then I wrote on this exercise sheet that I had developed for myself. I imagined the person saying that to me. "The problem is you're too sensitive." And maybe the stimulus was they had said something to me, and instead of giving them empathy, I started to justify. So if they said, "The problem was you're too sensitive," I guessed maybe at that moment that person was feeling frustrated because their need for understanding wasn't met by how I responded. And this was kind of fun for the first 4 or 5 messages, just to see that these things that I had been so afraid other people might say, how different it was if I could just learn to hear the feelings and needs behind any message. And to this day, this has been quite a relief for me to be conscious. I don't have to worry about being honest with people and how they might respond. I only have to be prepared to empathically connect with whatever comes back. And that means my power is in my hands. My security is in my hands. It's not in what other people think about me or say to me. Words can be a window that block us from really connecting. Or the words can be a window that helps us to connect in a way in which everybody's needs can get met.